Hello, and welcome to Making Sense of It. I am Mona Duncan, your moderator, and this little program is looking at the fact of reality therapy and choice theory and the genius of William Glasser and how it expands into all areas of our life. And our speaker today is Robert Martin, and he is going to be talking about framing and reframing. And so, welcome everyone. And hello, Robert. It's good to have you with us.
Good morning and hello, everyone. And so this morning we're going to be talking about framing and reframing, which was really, in many ways, something we do all the time. But in many ways, it's also very a radical approach for human beings. It's not something we human beings do naturally. And I was just sharing with Mona that this is also that choice theory and reality therapy are also something that we don't naturally cling to in our culture. It's something which presents an alternative approach, which, however well it works, it can be really difficult for people on first hearing to catch on to and realize this could really help me. So are we ready to start sharing?
We are ready. So go ahead and start and help us to see how we can frame and then reframe.
Okay. And
all right, you got it. Bringing it up to the full screen. Very good. Thanks.
Okay, so, and let me go ahead and start my timer so I keep myself down to about 20 minutes here. So the theme of what I've been presenting in this series is balancing our work and our life. And the things that I'm presenting really apply to both areas. So this morning, we're going to talk about reframing, and why is because reframing can make us and others more flexible and better problem solvers and change our lives. So an example of reframing is when you change how you look at a problem, you change the problem. So what our frame is the lens through which we see the world, ourselves, and others. And when you change your lens, then you change your life. And that's part of what choice theory and reality therapy are all about, is helping people to see and self-evaluate in a different way than they have in the past. So two examples of reframing that I've used both in my private practice and then working with teachers in classes of 15, 20, 30 teachers. So the first one is the fact that people can treat us badly at times, and then we tend to take it personally. And helping people to reframe and see, well, wait a minute, is this something that people are doing to get even with me, or is this something about who they are? And the idea is to focus on the idea, is to look at it as other people's bad behavior is not personal. I don't need to take it personally. It's a sign of who they are, not who I am. Even if they mean it personally, it's still they're the ones who are doing it because they are who they are. And as I've worked with people, what I found is this takes a bit of work to convince ourselves, and it's not taking things personally eases stress, particularly on the job, but also in our personal lives as well. But it takes a bit of work. The second reframing is reframing from, oh, I totally screwed that up. I messed that up. I did a bad job, to realizing as I self-evaluate, I didn't do a good job with that and I can do better. But what I did was my best at the time. And why would we want to do this? This is I think, it seems like a very small idea from William Glasser, but I think it's a really basic idea. Whatever somebody does is their best at the time. This is a way of reframing for ourselves to avoid beating ourselves up, which is something that in our culture we're wont to do, as if that's going to improve us, but it actually makes us more difficult to change. And similarly, it's easy to beat up on others when we tell ourselves, well, you were bad, you have bad behavior, blah, 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 rather than, okay, what you did was a mistake, was not a good idea, but it was your best at the time. And having worked with a lot of all age groups, from small children and school children to adults, I think that's a really bad thing that we need to avoid, and that is beating up on others, which is something can be difficult to do. Okay, so what is reframing? Well, all of us here's this beautiful picture of the world, and I picked it because it doesn't look at all realistic, does it? It's a work of art. It's a well-crafted ball on which we can see a representation of the world, and we realize, well, this isn't real, this is a work of art. The question is, do we believe we see the world as it is? And the answer is that on a moment-by-moment basis, we're all seeing the world through a lens shaped by our attitudes and our ideas, our beliefs and our experiences. But it always seems on a moment-by-moment basis as if, well, I'm just saying things as the way they are. And it takes a lot of work to realize, well, maybe there's a different way of looking at things. And that's when somebody comes and is ready to engage in a little bit of reality therapy, is we're helping them to rethink, or we're helping ourselves to rethink, well, wait a minute, is there another way to look at this? So the first thing is to realize that we change our frame all the time as infants and children and adolescents. Because we're constantly accommodating to new ways of thinking. And accommodation is a term that Piaget, of course, used, and it's something that we learn in school and through our own experiences. Otherwise, we would have never learned all the things we've needed to learn to navigate the world successfully as adults. But then when we become adults, it's like we've worked so hard to accumulate the assumptions and the beliefs that we have that everything all seems true and inevitably. And maybe you've heard other people say, or even heard yourself say, well, that's just the way things are. And it's very hard for us as human beings to think, wait a minute, I'm looking through the lens of my beliefs and my assumptions. If I change my beliefs and assumptions, the world can look a little bit different. So when are we most willing to change the frame that we have? Well, if we really want something positive, like, for example, when we go to school, well, until we are turn 16 and no longer have to go to school, well, we're not choosing it. But then afterwards, if we choose to go to college or professional school or how to drive a diesel tractor, it's because we want something positive, and we're willing to go through training and apprenticeship that changes some aspect of the world in which we live. We have to learn new skills, new ways of looking at things. The other is when we want to escape something negative. And this is where counseling can come in, whether we're doing it with ourselves through choice theory and reality therapy, or we're helping other people to do it. The enemy is certainty, and that is that we want uncertainty because uncertainty is very scary. And the question we have to ask ourselves, and maybe others, is, are you willing to give up a bit of certainty to get more of what you want? And here I'm framing this. So this is actually every question we ask ourselves is a way of framing some bit of reality. And this is a way of framing a way of thinking about certainty that we don't want to give up. Well, wait a minute. Am I willing to give a little bit of certainty to get something that I want? Skills. One I'll call reflective, and the other I'll call reflexive. Reflective is when we review our behaviors and our experiences. This is pretty familiar, and it's fairly easy. The other is not so familiar and can be difficult even for professionals, and that is identifying and reviewing our assumptions and our attitudes that give rise to our behaviors and our experiences. And this is very difficult. So to reframe ourselves, we have to become reflexive. So here's a reframing question for you. Am I willing to examine my ideas, beliefs, and attitudes? Are you willing to examine your ideas and beliefs and attitudes? And we see a keyhole there in the background, and it's like, this is a key that can open the door to a new way of living, solving problems, and so on. So how do our frames come about? A little bit of a diversion here. Just if you're a parent, then how did you become a parent? Well, we all become parents, the kind of parents our parents were, and we have to work very hard if we want to be even a little bit different. We find ourselves doing the same things that our parents did, even if we swore, well, I'm never going to do that as when I'm a parent. Or the same thing with teachers. Well, I'm not going to be that kind of a teacher, but however our teachers were, that's how we tend to teach. And then if we can expand that to see that our culture teaches us a certain way of being with all of its assumptions and its prejudices, and teaches us to see in a certain way. And that frames our attitudes. And we really have to work hard to see, well, that's not the only way of seeing things. So what makes changing our frame difficult? Well, the question is, does a fish know it swims in water? And we presume the answer is no. If you swim in water your whole life, well, you don't know that you're swimming in water. It's just part of your environment. So we don't see the frame through which we see. It's invisible to us, and it takes a lot of work to see that. And that's one of the things that reality therapy can do for people, is it helps them to question and self-evaluate and see the world in a new way by evaluating, wait a minute, what is it that I want? Am I getting what I want? Why am I not getting what I want? And through putting them through a process, not just once, but over and over, that they and we begin to see the world in a new way. So are beliefs hard to give up? Yeah, they are. An example is the belief that what we're doing is effective. And this is one of the things that I didn't even realize until I think I became a professor and was already a psychologist. But I really didn't realize, well, why were some of my colleagues acting in ways I considered, this is really a bad way of acting? And then somebody pointed out, well, they're doing that because they think it's effective. And if you go back and look at some of the things that Glasser has said, what he's really pointing out is that in the past, people have found that things like angering and depressing and complaining and criticizing and giving up seldom work, but they sometimes work. And they might have worked in the past. And they can be ways of getting help. They can be ways of controlling other people, even though typically they don't work. It's hard to get people to see this is not a good way of acting. And I know for myself, I was brought up in a family where people controlled each other through being angry. And so, yeah, just if things don't go my way, yeah, I tend to instinctively get angry without even thinking about it. So ineffective behavior might have been our best response in the past and might have even got us what we wanted. And it takes a lot of examining. And again, that's what reality therapy does. And what choice theory does is to give us the intellectual basis of that, because it's really helpful not just to change our behavior, but also to intellectually understand why that works. It's not essential, but it can be very helpful. And that's what something like choice theory does. It gives us an intellectual understanding. So let's look at 6 tools for reframing. We don't need necessarily all of these all the time, but maybe some of these will, you'll find will sound familiar, and some of them may be new. The first one, which, okay, this comes from Glasser, that I've heard him say a number of times, but I don't know if it can be found in the books. I've read virtually all the books, but I don't remember where I found it. And that is, there are 2 ways to look at a problem and deal with a problem. The one is you can change what you do. The second one is that you can change how you see the problem, and then that changes the problem. And then you can change what you do. I think that's a really good intellectual way of viewing it. And I really appreciated Glasser pointing that out. And I think that I've remembered that ever since. That was just very insightful. So an example of tool number 1 is, and again, this comes from something that I read in my 20s, just this one sentence. What can I do about it? Or what can I do about this? To me, that was the central message of Glasser's most popular book ever, Reality Therapy, which came out in the late 50s and I read in the 60s. So to me, this is the most effective question I can ask myself. And what I learned is I stopped being frustrated about all the things I couldn't change and realizing once I asked myself, what can I do about this? Even if the answer was nothing, then moving on was really valuable. Tool number 2 is learning, particularly learning more about the areas where our frame affects our attitudes and behaviors. Let's look at an example. We all eat, we all exercise, we all sleep. But we don't necessarily do this in a way that's most effective for good health and long life. There are books and videos about these topics. But what I notice is there are very few people that seem to pay attention to these and take advantage of them. I've been to McDonald's recently, and I noticed that they've taken all of their, at least in our area, maybe not in yours, but they've taken all their salads off the menu. You cannot find a single thing on their menu that's really good for you. So learning more about the areas and realizing that our unconscious belief of what's healthy and what's not healthy maybe is not what the research says, and that can take a real effort. Tool number 3 is to treat helpful assumptions as if they're true. For example, one of my favorites is whatever I do is my best at the time. Now, I can't prove that, but I find it a really, really helpful belief that I treat as true. Another one, which is more difficult, is the belief that making better choices about exercising and eating and sleeping is hard, but it will be worth it in the long run. I can't prove that. I might get hit by a truck in 2 weeks and it won't have helped, but I treat this idea as if it were true, and I work to put it into effect. Tool number 4 is identifying questions, beliefs, is to identify and question beliefs and attitudes and behaviors, and then evaluate whether they're working. And again, I think this is something that reality therapy can help people do, is something that choice theory can help people do, because choice theory is a whole set of beliefs and attitudes that are very different from what most people believe. Even ideas like we all need to have fun. When I work with kids and say, well, now, you know, we all have a need to have fun. Does that sound right? It's, oh yeah, that really sounds right. But when with my adult clients, it's like, well, now, you know, we all need to have some fun. That's really important. They look at me, it's like, gee, I don't know about that. I never thought about that. So, and then that's my prelude to say, well, what do you do for fun? But if they don't believe fun is important, well, then it's like the answer isn't going to do them any good. So I like 2 ideas that I've learned from Buddhist teachings. And the first is, my assumptions are not me. We all tend to identify our assumptions and beliefs as being us, and that's why we don't want to give them up. Whereas Buddhism says, no, my ideas, my assumptions, my beliefs, these aren't me. My opinions are not me. And I like to say, you know what? My opinions are not very important. Your opinions are not very important, and I'll tell you why. Because 10 years from now, the chances are that a good number of my opinions and your opinions will have changed, and they'll be modified. They'll be different. So how can they be so important and so true now, but then different in 10 years? The other one is that awareness creates change in itself. Just becoming aware, for example, of the assumptions of choice theory, can change our lives. As long as we don't just read it and forget about it, we have to keep reminding ourselves and use that as the basis of how we look at the world. And that's reframing. Learning something about choice theory is a way of reframing our ideas. And that in turn reframes our behavior. Tool 6 is asking questions. And some of my favorites are, well, what do I want? Is what I'm doing working? What can I do about it? What's my plan? How did it work? What's my new plan? And of course, these are all questions from reality therapy. And you can include these in conversations with other people without ever counseling them or going into a reality therapy kind of mode, which is probably not going to be important in most of our casual conversations. We're not there to do therapy with people, but we can still use these questions. So to summarize, when you change how you frame your world, you change your world. And the least effective way to frame or reframe is trying to convince ourselves to change or trying to convince others to change. It just doesn't work. The more we try to convince others, the more they resist. The more we try to convince ourselves, the more we resist. So reframing is both easy and difficult. It's easy because we do it all our lives. It's difficult because when we try to identify and question our underlying assumptions and attitudes and behaviors, it's very hard to know what water we're swimming in. It's very hard to identify our prejudices. They tend to be very unconscious. So when you change how you look at a problem, you change the problem. When you change how you look at other people, you change your relationships. When you change how you look at life, you change your life. The biggest way to do this is to get ourselves to act in new ways. As one of my teachers liked to say, if you desire to see, learn how to act. And this is what reality therapy focuses on, is trying to get people to self-evaluate and decide what behavior is going to work better for them. And then if that works, they come back the next week and their attitude is changed a little bit, or maybe their ideas have changed a little bit. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, very good. So can you expand more on that? If you desire to see,
learn how to act.
Learn how to act. What can you expand on that?
Well, okay, let's take every kind of learning to see, whether it's, and this is something that comes from Piaget, but it also comes from our experience. Let's say if you want to be a professional, whether it's a professional truck driver or a surgeon, you go through cycles of acting and seeing. You have to do some kind of a perform an action, and that helps you to see better what that thing is. You take anatomy as a surgeon and you start dissecting, and as you dissect and handle and so on, you begin to see things that you didn't even know existed. You might have seen them in a book, but it really doesn't connect in your vision until you start to take it apart. When you even something like take a puzzle apart and put it together, you begin to see the puzzle in a new way, and you learn, and you can, if you do it over and over, you can do the puzzle faster and faster. So this is how we learn. Every skill is a cycle of acting in order to see, and then seeing a little better in order to act a little bit more precisely. So it's this circular thing.
Okay, that's good, because we learn from the inside out, but the more we can be aware of what we're seeing and then that can help us to see, better, huh?
Right. Well, my wife is a botanist, and one of her fellow botanists once said, well, you take a group of students out into the forest and they see brown and green, but the teacher sees all different kinds of trees. Like in our area, we have a lot of oaks, but you know what? I mean, you can see a half a different kind, if you know what to look for. There are half a dozen different kinds of oaks. There's shingle oaks and pin oaks and all different white oaks and so on, and black oaks, and they all look a little bit different. The leaves are a little bit different, but and that can be tricky. She would teach them how to recognize poison ivy by even making rubbings of poison ivy and the rubbings were done of the poison ivy under a sheet of plastic so that nobody got poisoned. And they would draw them and they would look at them and look at different examples and so on. So you can't just say, look at the poison ivy and see it and now recognize it in the woods. It takes practice. It takes this cycle of action and seeing. And that's what reality therapy does too. You get people to act differently toward others and toward themselves and toward problems. And they begin to see those problems. They begin to see those other people in different ways.
Right.
And that's where the power of it comes. Yeah.
Yeah, it expands your universe a little bit, expands your working with others. Well, this has been very interesting. So thank you very much on teaching us how to frame and reframe. And we will close the airways now, and then we will talk with our guests that are here to ask questions and make comments.